Good morning, everyone. And yes, once again, I am Daoud Shabaka. And normally, I'm out in the community. I'm a community advocate. Presenting, being on panels is kind of a new thing for me. Uh, and even seeing my picture up on, on stage. Okay, that's a little different. Um, But just one small correction. I joined the staff of the Harambe House 7 years ago, but I volunteered with them ever since they were founded about 35 years ago. Um, they were founded through the efforts of Dr. Mildred McLean because at that time, the Savannah River plant, which was based in Aiken, South Carolina, had um, a leak, a leak of 20,000 picocuries of tritium. It came down through the waterways of South Carolina, came down the coast of Georgia, and infiltrated the Savannah River plant, Savannah River, and affected the communities that were on the west side of the city. There were 9 communities there. Savannah, the city has 42 neighborhood associations, and those 9 neighborhoods are on the west side of the city, right near the port, and surrounded by 17 industrial companies that do work with the port. The one of the most affected communities at that time by that leak was Hudson Hill. Hudson Hill came to Dr. McLean, asked for help because they were not getting any redress from uh, their complaints to the city and county. And so she was able to form the Harambe House, Citizens for Environmental Justice, and they really did a major campaign to make that leak a news item, which helped to force Savannah, the city of Savannah, Georgia, South Carolina, to begin cleanup. From that point, it became clear that an organization like Harambe House was needed in this area. Because as I stated, with the port operating, which is a big, financial and economic engine for the city, the state of Georgia, and the Southeast. It also has the unfortunate uh, uh, reaction of producing a great deal of pollution. There's diesel and hazardous material pollution that comes from the operations of these industrial companies, from the ports. There's gas and fumes, VOCs, black carbon that comes from the diesel trucks used and the train system to carry goods and services to and from the port. And a lot of that pollution is centered in that area on the west side of the city. Now, these residents have noticed a increase in ailments over the decades. They have seen the increase in asthma, the increase in childhood asthma, increase in diabetes. They've watched their elder family members die from cancer, you name it, lung cancer, pancreatic cancer, throat cancer, and they have also been concerned about how to change the operations of these industries, the operations of the port, to improve their lives. As they have contacted city officials, county officials, they always receive the same response. Well, We need data. Can you bring the data? You say that your family members, your aunts and uncles have died from the same type of cancer. Everyone in your family has diabetes. Well, you're saying that is anecdotal. Can you present the actual health data that shows this information? Well, these residents felt that shouldn't be a problem because Georgia Tech, Georgia State, University of Georgia, Savannah State, they've come through, they've questioned me, they've questioned my parents, my aunts and uncles, my grandparents for years. They've conducted studies and surveys. So we'll just call the Department of Public Health and have them provide us that information. Better yet, why don't we call Georgia Tech? Why don't we call Chatham County? Let's get those reports. They did that. Apparently, from what I understand, they did that in the late 80s, in the mid 90s. They did that at the turn of the century. I even asked Dr. McLean, well, there was a study that was done just 4 or 5 years ago by Georgia Tech, city of Savannah, on the port expansion. As you know, or maybe you don't know, the Savannah port systems, they're about the fifth or the sixth largest in the nation, but they're the third highest in the movement of goods and services. Third behind Los Angeles and Long Beach and New York and New Jersey. There's a lot of business coming to Georgia thanks to Savannah and the ports. And now that the river has been deepened and widened, the larger tanker ships are able to come through. So there's going to be even more business. So when this study was done about the impact of widening and deepening the river, and one of the issues to be looked at by that widening and deepening was the environmental impact, the increase in air pollution, water pollution in the area, specifically the west side of the city. That's what we heard. When we asked for that report, that's what came. And we've been asking for the last couple of years now. So again and again, the residents are asking for this information, asking for this data. The data that was collected from these very residents. But that information is not coming forth. Right? So, as I said earlier, I'm not into this, public speaking. And my presentation, I think, might be a little different from everyone else's. But the reason for that is because I really have a question. Where is the data? Where is the health data that we can look at and compare to our anecdotal information and then go back to you and say, see, it's here. And more importantly, why is it so difficult to even get that data? I did a Google search on stats and demographics by zip code. And the amount of information I got back was amazing. Breakdowns of gender, race, and heads of households, total population by age, estimated population over time, vacancy rates, home values, so on and so forth. Every type of information, bit of information you would want to receive about a given zip code, except any health-related statistics. So the residents of the West Side, when they heard I was coming here, they asked me to ask you guys, can you put together a epidemiological study, although they did not use that term, but I knew what they were saying, that will examine the correlation between the occurrence of illness and chronic health issues within these 9 communities in relation to the identified hazardous materials that are used by these industrial companies in their normal operations. Connect that, get a correlation, and then can we begin to look at what we can do to mitigate, change, or improve the methods of safety for the workers and for the community that live right next to these industries. And that's it. I didn't bring any slides because, well, right, don't need it, but also if we ask the public health and they come back with nothing, they said, what are you doing? Don't give them anything. Tell them what it is and have them come back to us with a solution. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, our next speaker, Katie Missessen, is the current nutrition education supervisor for the LA Regional Food Bank. She brings with her a diversity of knowledge, inside and outside of public health and health education. She spent 5 years in political advocacy, nonprofit work, and political campaign field organizing. She spent the last 4 years evaluating and developing nutrition education programming for culinary institutes, community organizations, sustainable nonprofit farms, healthcare providers, and their local health department. And she's going to share her experience in how implementing trauma-informed health education programming resulted in impactful community engagement and trust building.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I agree with everything what Dobu said. I do have slides because I just need pretty things to look at whenever I'm creating something. But essentially, this is from my perspective of working with my local health department at the city of Pasadena. And so essentially what we're really going to be going over today is not only looking at the historical inequities of Pasadena and how that truly impacted how I was able to really connect with a particular partner that had nothing to do with the health department, quite frankly, and nothing to do with the city. So this is really something that I really want to stress of, like, when you're looking for new partnerships that probably historically does not want to do anything in regards to working for a health department, it takes a lot of work and a lot of authenticity. And that's really kind of what my personal account was in terms of working with NDLON, which is the National Day Labor Organizing Network. And also, because I no longer work for the city, this does not reflect the city of Pasadena, this is my personal account. Just had to get that out of the way. So in regards to the city of Pasadena, it's a very unique city. So I grew up there, I was born and raised there. And so even without understanding this kind of history of how the city functions and why it has such the deep disparities that it does, and through the impact of redlining, I could experience it just growing up there. Like, I realized it. And because of that, when I came into my position, I really led with that and really understanding exactly how my city functions and how this really impacts everything from a public health perspective, right? So kind of looking at the history of the city, a lot of folks know the city of Pasadena because of the Rose Parade, right? And the Rose Bowl and things along those lines. Take a lot of pride in that. That pride of the Rose Bowl is the reason why redlining was allowed to occur, why we were actually allowed as a city to kind of push Black and brown bodies out of parts of the city into the northwest part of Pasadena. So when I'm referring to Northwest, that's kind of a huge part that has huge health disparities, huge gaps, and essentially is the deepest part of impacting of redlining. And so my former employer with the health department, actually their center was in City Hall, which was in a really beautiful part of the city. And they decided to move actually to Northwest Pasadena to be closer to the community. They were like, physically, let's be there so that way we can actually serve the community in a general proximity of where they are and meet them where they are. But I think we've all have kind of worked in government buildings. They're not the friendliest. They don't look very pretty. They're not really accessible in a lot of ways. So even though physically I was there for 2 years, I physically went out into the community in order to actually meet them where they are. And that's something that I really stress with a lot of folks, that sure, geographically you can be there, but leave your office on occasion. The nice lighting is a lot better outside, okay? So this is kind of what we can see here in terms of like the impact of redlining for the city of Pasadena. So where the black area is, that's now currently the 210 freeway. And so that entire area was filled with, specifically with black residents, and they were also thriving businesses that they forced to move upward into the northwest part of the city. And you can see right there. So the blue portion is actually where the Rose Bowl is located. So they used it as a way to be like, we can't build there. It's our beautiful Rose Bowl. We're not allowed to kind of have a freeway or any type of means go through there. So instead they were like, let's kind of build right there where the green portion is. And that's where all of our black residents were currently located in terms of being in the city of Pasadena. So in regards to the landscape of trust building, so really understanding this, like I mentioned, I grew up there, so I felt it without really understanding from a public health or for an epidemiological and data perspective, all the stuff there. So this is in regards to 2020, so kind of looking exactly the difference between the city as a whole and the Northwest, specifically 91103. That's kind of the big area in which we kind of associate with this particular part of the city, of like Northwest Pasadena. So ever diagnosed with asthma, 9.4 as a city, 10.3 in Northwest. Diagnosed with diabetes, 8.5, 10.9 in regards to Northwest. And this trend is continuing for every single part of the city. And it's not a very large one. There's over 140,000 people that live there. It's a very small pocket. So it really kind of shows how deep the disparity exists within the city. And then because of that, there's been a lot of distrust for the city as a whole. So we are very unique in that we are a local, the city of Pasadena has a local health department. It's not very common in California because it's such a large state. It's typically actually county health departments and how they function, but there's 3 city ones and Pasadena is one of them. So because there's such a distrust from the city, from a lot of its residents, especially its black and brown residents, there's a huge, huge amount of nonprofits that exist in this city. And the nonprofits kind of do the work. They actually do the community organizing. They actually do the services, the things that a lot of the community expects for the city to do for them, but instead the nonprofits do it instead. So this is the program I used to work for, the Nutrition and Physical Activities Program. So it was established in 1998. It was through CalFresh Healthy Living, specifically through the SNAP Ed funding that was going through there. And there's kind of 2 main components of the program. So the first portion is really providing direct services through nutrition education. That's really my bread and butter in regards to, thank you, Elizabeth, for sharing my bio with that. That's really what I love to do. I love to teach people. I love to connect with the community. And this was really what I felt the most comfort in terms of the programming, what I really lean towards in building partnerships. But the second portion, just as equally as important, but just in a different capacity. So in those partnership developments, really looking at long-term solutions to eliminate those disparities, specifically when it comes to making sure that we address obesity in the city of Pasadena. So in regards to kind of looking at where the partnerships really lie and where the gaps are that we can kind of really fill, we decided to really start working with food pantries. And so there are roughly about 14 to 20 pantries that exist in the city. One that we saw as a really great opportunity to not only work for in regards to improving kind of the pantry operations, providing nutrition education services, but really building a meaningful partnership was through Mano a Mano under the National Day Labor Organizing Network. And if you don't know anything about the National Day Labor Organizing Network, they are a fantastic organization. They do really phenomenal work for undocumented workers, for folks specifically in the city as well. It's a hub. The community center is where everybody goes in regards to, the folks that feel really comfortable in the community. So we really wanted to make sure that we built a really meaningful partnership with them that was really centered on the really last portion of this piece, which is to move at the speed of trust. They led the conversations. They led how we were going to work together. And I really want to stress that that was the most important part of having a meaningful partnership with them. And so here are kind of the key takeaways in regards to our partnership. Number 1, staffing is key. So when it comes to staffing, I really wanted to make sure that a lot of barriers were eliminated in terms of who I was going to take on to help me in regards to building a lot of the capacity of our partnerships with the city of Pasadena. So I hired somebody, his name is Jorge Martinez. He cannot be here today. I adore him. What's up, Jorge? He understood the city of Pasadena because, like me, he grew up there, and he grew up in the northwest portion specifically. So when him and I went into Endelon, he could speak just as he is as a person. He spoke with authenticity. It wasn't coming from a place of like kind of how most city entities come into their spaces. It was very much rooted in who he was as a person, who I am as a person, which is why we were able to kind of get off that initial cold reaction that, quite frankly, I thought we were going to get a worse reaction coming into the very first time. But I think because we came in with that authenticity is why it was a little bit easier to kind of break off and start building that trust, like Athenas was mentioning, that it takes a long time and it's really authentic. Acknowledgement. Acknowledge that racism, institutional racism, and white supremacy exist. Just do it, all right? And so, especially in regards to, again, building trust, fine, the vernacular, the vocabulary in terms of how we talk about disparities and equity, you don't have to use that fancy language, right? Just acknowledge the fact that it exists, the city has done wrong, and that you are there to create a new space and a safer space in order for new things to happen. And then I think the reason why we're able to not only use that acknowledgement to kind of, bring down that little bit of a barrier, but again, provide tangible resources. So things like assessments, things like surveys, they're very extracting. It's so much of an extracting kind of relationship. Please take the survey. We really appreciate your feedback and things along those lines, but do they actually let you know what was the impact of that survey a couple years later? Typically not, usually never. So instead, we were able to say, yes, let's do a partnership, let's work on food pantry operations, all the great things that we're trying to do to make sure food insecurity is a lot less in the city, but also we're gonna provide a class for you. We're gonna do something where we can talk about our what nutrition's all about. In addition, Jorge also created a safe space for the men specifically of the Day Labor Organizing Network to talk about what's going on every single day. There's a lot of alcoholism that's there. They recently had somebody at the center that committed suicide. Okay, and we created those safe spaces in an actual tangible way of a service that we can kind of build that trust and that rapport. And the last thing I'll kind of say in terms of creating a safe space, again, try as much as you can to go into their space, but let them invite you in, right? So Teams is great, whatever kind of thing you use, Zoom, it's great in terms of like the amount of folks you can actually meet with, but actually meeting face-to-face in person, it makes such a big difference. So this was the kind of mission statement that we kind of developed together as a partnership. So we aspire to live in a city of diverse communities where day laborers and their families are able to live long, thriving, and healthy lives. Through mutual respect, trust, and collaboration, we will use food as a foundation towards systemic changes. And those are my references. And I kind of want to end with this particular thing. So this is the mantra of Mano a Mano, the National Day Labor Organizing Union. It's solidarity, it's not charity. So really building trust is this foundation of solidarity. It's not extracting in any type of way. It's not charitable. It's really based on respect and authenticity. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you for that. Our next presenter is Jillian Capper. She is the program manager for the Center of Climate Health and Equity at APHA. Her work focuses on implementing APHA's climate and health activities, as well as program development and management. She's a public health professional who supports the protection of both people and the planet. She holds a Master's of Public Health in Environmental Health from the University of Minnesota School of Public Health, and outside of work she spends time hiking with her dog, exploring new cities and places, and catching up with her friends and family.
Great, good morning everyone. As said before, my name is Jill Capper, Program Manager for the Center for Climate Health and Equity at APHA, and today I will be speaking on the behalf of the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, Michigan Climate and Health Adaptation Program, on specifically their work on building local community partnerships to develop climate and health adaptation plans for Michigan communities. So today I'm going to briefly talk about MyCHEP goals and work. I'll also introduce how to use the Climate and Health Adaptation Planning Guide that was developed based on the Marquette County pilot project, which I will talk more in depth today about, and then end today on the lessons learned and key takeaways from that pilot project. So the Michigan Climate and Health Adaptation Program, or MyCHAP, supports a public health system that is ready to address climate change. It sits within the Department of Health and Human Services at the state level. And I'm not going to read through all the goals and work, but just want to highlight that the program aims to include all vulnerable populations and consider those populations in all the programs and policies that address climate change impacts in Michigan. They also work to be subject matter experts for the Department of Health and Human Services at the state level, as well as at the local level with other local health departments, local government, and of course, community-based organizations. So in a response to a gap in guidance how to specifically integrate health into climate action plans, and also a gap in guidance on how to implement climate adaptation into rural communities in Michigan, MyCHAP partnered with the Michigan State University to develop the Climate and Health Adaptation Planning Guide for Michigan communities. It aims to help Michigan communities develop their own location-specific climate and health adaptation plan, or to integrate climate and health concepts into their local existing initiatives. A lot of the expertise, information, and knowledge that was used to develop the guidebook came from the Marquette County pilot project. I'm not going to read through all these main guiding principles, but there are 4 main guiding principles within the guidebook. I'll call out, really to keep health equity and at the forefront of all action. And you can also, if you want, you want more information about the guidebook, that link at the bottom will get you there. So in 2017, MyCHAP partnered with the Michigan State University School of Planning, Design, and Construction, as well as MSU Extension, to embark on a pilot project that really aimed to build capacity for communities in Michigan on addressing climate and health, essentially to co-develop a climate and health adaptation plan at the county level. And so Marquette County was chosen for this pilot project. You can see Marquette County is located in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, which is on the map in blue. It has about a population size of 66,000 people. Is predominantly white with 1.4% African American or Black and 1.8% Hispanic or Latino. And it's mostly comprised of rural communities. It was chosen for this pilot project because of the existing significant adaptive capacity and existing community concern about climate change, with a lot of individuals and families already experiencing climate-related events like heavy rain and flooding that were affecting the lives and livelihoods of those communities. So before even beginning any planning, it was really important for the project team to identify key partners and plan champions. Your key partners really drive and guide the work and should include community groups that you're trying to serve. And your plan champions are vital to a successful planning process and an implementation of a plan. They really make sure that plan leadership meets regularly and holds the team members accountable for getting the tasks done. And so for the Marquette pilot project, I just want to highlight a couple of key partners, including the MSU Extension Coordinator. This individual had already had an amazing network with the rural communities in Marquette County. He was viewed as a trusted individual by the community. And so the MyCHAP team and MSU team really worked through this individual to gain trust from the community and kind of have that fast track credibility of a state representative working at a local community. In addition, the Marquette Climate Adaptation Task Force, this task force was already in existence before the pilot project began. It comprised of both former and current elected officials, as well as individuals from the energy sector, academia, as well as environmental groups. And so it was a really well-rounded individuals of people who were interested in climate change, but also had a concern of climate change at the local level. And then lastly, I'll talk about the Marquette County Health Department. They were brought in to amplify the health voice again. They also had partners from emergency response. They had partners from area physicians and brought in others from health expert fields. They also really partnered with our MSU extension coordinator to identify vulnerable populations within that community. So in phase 1 of this pilot project, stakeholder engagement happened. Focus groups of 25 stakeholders were held. And this included vulnerable populations from aging services, homeless shelter services, as well as continuum of care and Veterans Affairs. The funding that was available for the pilot project did go straight to the Michigan State University team to facilitate the focus group and community meetings. Looking back, the project team recognizes that they should have allocated budget for honoraria for the community participation, and going forward, working with any other community would be doing so. Questions were open-ended and health-oriented, and were about how is climate change impacting your life, what challenges do you face, and where within Marquette County should the project team be focusing on. It was also really important to be transparent. As the state representative, the project team realized and acknowledged that transparency was needed to gain trust. And so there was a lot of discussion about what a climate and health adaptation plan could and could not do. They did not want to mislead or misguide any of the community members or stakeholder groups that were there, but also highly encourage everyone who was participating to express any concern or any experience that they had, and those experiences were captured and addressed in other ways outside of this project if it couldn't be met. So after those focus group meetings, that information was gathered by the project team and summarized and then given back to the community groups and stakeholders that came to the initial focus group meetings. And so there were 2 community meetings held where people could write down their thoughts on sticky notes and place them by the different summarized information and start to prioritize which climate priorities and concerns that they had. Some of them included, flooding and water quality, while ticks and air quality were seen as secondary priorities. Another great tool that was used was visualization tools, including design imaging. This really helped participants visualize, what a space could be and transform into with adaptive interventions, such as vegetation, tree planting, non-motorized vehicles. So you can see on the left, you have like a very underutilized space. There's not much shade or trees or vegetation, and a building that's really not being used. And then on the right, you have a much more welcoming, inviting space, a sidewalk that can be used both by pedestrians and bikers, a building that could be used by the community, trees, and other vegetation that could help with flooding. During this phase, again, community members and stakeholder groups were asked, what do you like about this design, what is missing, and what could be improved on. In phases 2 and 3, these last 2 phases of the development of the plan, the project team also shared preliminary policy recommendations where participants could vote on which ones they like best and which ones they like least, and then could co-develop together which ones should take priority. So you can see here, one of them was about increases in allergens and an example of what potentially could be done in Marquette County. After phase 3, at the county, the project team developed the climate and health adaptation plan and then presented it to and shared it with local government officials in the village of Negaunee and Marquette Township. At that point, community engagement was definitely lessened. The project team realizes that during implementation phase of this project, they should have definitely included more community engagement, not just during the development of the plan. There was some seed funding that MyChap provided to implement some of the recommendations, including tree planting, health signage, as well as rain gardens. And then lastly, I just want to end on the lessons learned and key takeaways. In the beginning of this presentation, we talked about identifying key partners and plan champions, and that was, really how this particular project was so successful, identifying that particular individual who already had a lot of trust within the rural communities in Marquette County, really fast-tracked that relationship between the state health department and the local communities there. This also allows community leaders or those identified as trusted voices to actually guide the work and drive it. Again, ensuring your timeline allows for sustainable, continuous, and meaningful community engagement from the start of the project to the end of implementation. We also talked about transparency. As a state representative, they understood that being transparent was another way to gain trust and not to overpromise or mislead, but also to really encourage folks to say anything that they had concerns about and address them in other meaningful ways if it couldn't be done within this project. One of the feedback in the very beginning of discussions was a lot of communities had concern that project outcomes wouldn't actually benefit them. And so really in the beginning of a project, while you're co-developing your plan with community members, ensuring those project outcomes are going to benefit the communities that you're trying to serve. And lastly but not least, to compensate community members for their time and expertise. This not only demonstrates you value the community's experience and expertise, but is another wonderful way to gain trust by the community. And I just want to say thank you to the Michigan team. Erin Ferguson and Julia Field are currently with the Michigan Climate and Health Adaptation Program. And I think that's it. I'll hand it off back to Elizabeth.
Thank you, Jillian. So I want to invite everyone to take a moment and stretch. If you need to stand up, please, because we're doing great on time. We've got another speaker, and then we'll have time for questions. But I know sometimes sitting can be exhausting, ironically.
We lose people when you stretch.
Then they don't deserve to hear the rest. All right, so Julian Drix. He's got 8 years of experience working in a state health department, as well as 15 plus years experience working in or with grassroots community-based environmental justice organizations. In his current work, he supports health departments and community power-building organizations in developing strong and trusting relationships. In his presentation today, he will be drawing from the direct experiences he's had as both a government public health worker and also as an environmental justice organizer. He will share examples of how public health professionals working inside governmental agencies can support grassroots EJ organizers and power building organizations and best practices for building and maintaining partnerships based on trust. Oh, just kidding.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for the introduction, Elizabeth, and the invitation to be part of this panel. It's great to be up here alongside such amazing people and in this room with you all today. I also don't have slides. I just wanted to talk and share some stories. And I wanted to start by just saying that I'm actually really struggling being here at APHA, being at this conference, struggling with my relationship with public health as an institution and the institutions of this field. I just want to acknowledge that we are, our governments are complicit in ongoing genocides, both in Gaza and Palestine right now, and in the lands that we're standing on in this nation, so-called nation. Free Palestine, reparations, land back, and that's where equity starts and ends. I see a lot of this field co-opting the language of equity and justice. So, thank you. I'm a bit cynical and bitter, and also have some things to share about kind of public health as a field and what it could be and should be, but oftentimes is not. I also want to start by acknowledging this year I've had the honor and luck of working with Atenis and Katarina both, and Beto, who's here in the audience, and helped organize this panel. Through a program, the organization I work at, HIP, Human Impact Partners, has a project called Power Building Partnerships for Health, where we work with community power building organizations and health departments on inside-outside strategies and supporting community power building. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that, and we'll share a little bit of those stories as well. So I'm going to tell some kind of abridged kind of biographical background of my own kind of journey in public health. And I kind of stumbled into this field by mistake, coming from the world of environmental justice organizing. I come out of the kind of anarchist social movements, neoliberal free trade, anti-war movements from the past 20 years ago or so. And living in Providence, Rhode Island, I was part of an environmental justice organizing group there. We were working on asthma, air pollution, contaminated brownfield sites. And so that was my first kind of connection with the health department. They had an asthma coalition that they were coordinating, and we're doing kind of toxicologist work around some of the brownfield sites, working with EJ communities around brownfield and exposures. And so that was my first interaction with public health departments. And then the asthma program job, the person who I was working with at the health department at that time moved to a different job, so that job opened up. And I made the decision to apply for that position purely financially and really struggled with that. And when I happened to get the job, had to kind of consult with all my movement elders first. Is this what selling out is about? Is this like, what am I doing? Like, I don't know about this. And was, told by some of my movement elders that we have too many organizers who are in just, paid jobs in the nonprofit industrial complex. We need organizers everywhere, and we need people on the inside. So you should do it, and you'll find your reasons why you're there once you're there. So I worked at the health department for 8 years. The first 6 or so was in the asthma program. I also ended up getting my degree in public health during that time through a sponsored fellowship through the program. And then when COVID hit, became the co-director of the Health Equity Institute at the health department, and was the coordinated response lead for the COVID response in our 2 hardest hit communities in the state. So the health department of Rhode Island is the Rhode Island Department of Health. It's a single one, there's no local public health. It's a single state health department. I left that agency about 1.5 years ago, and now I'm working at Human Impact Partners, where we work with community power building organizations and public health, and focusing on building the bridges between those two. So most of what I'm going to share is just some stories of my experience within the health department, but then also connecting it to the work that I'm doing now. And one of the things that we do a lot at HIP is talking about power and power inequality. Power inequities and imbalances is a fundamental driver of health inequities. And power frameworks are on how do we build community power and support community power building organizations, and the role of public health and governmental public health in particular to leverage governmental power in support of community power. Shortly after I joined the health department, this was the time, I believe it was Eric Garner's murder by the police in New York, and the phrase "I can't breathe" was kind of started in the kind of social movement during those times, and so that was a push to start organizing within the health department. So as an organizer working in government, I approached my time in the health department as, how do I organize? It's a very different style of organizing. It's a very different set of power dynamics and people to be working with. And so at that time, talking about, I'm working in asthma, I can't breathe. How do we connect the dots on this? And so we started an internal group within the health department. We called the Social Justice Roundtable. We held speaker series. We showed documentaries. We invited people from the community to come in and talk about their work and share about it. And tried to organize across the health department of what can we be doing differently. We were lucky to have a director at that time, the first Black woman to ever be the director of the health department, and really centering the health department's mission around health equity, addressing social determinants. And so we had some support internally, but we also had to really push and organize, and there was a lot of backlash around that. Another thing we started internally was a health impact assessment group to advise the director on environmental issues, which was not her background. And so we had asthma and the lead program and the drinking water quality program and the environmental health kind of areas, advising her on different kind of policy things that would come up. One of the first things that came up at that time was a power plant, a massive natural gas powered power plant that was being very much advocated by our governor. The governor brought in the CEO out of Chicago. It was an energy power plant, and it went through a multi-year long permitting process that communities very much organized. So this was in the northwest corner of the state, a rural, predominantly white, more conservative part of the state, but did have some issues with asthma. There was a lot of social movement organizing around that space in that kind of area. And the health department was able to weigh in on that. We kind of inserted ourselves into that process of let's look at the health impacts of what this could be in terms of climate change in particular. And that was one of the pieces that eventually ended up getting the power plant permit denied by the Energy Facility Siting Board. And so health data and health framing has power to be able to change these kinds of permitting processes, but it takes real organizing work from inside because it's really easy to just, especially when the elected officials that oversee the agency are pushing it in a certain direction, you have to be willing to take risks, and the leadership of your department has to be willing to kind of hold strong against those risks because your jobs are on the line. Another big thing, this is the one that I was more directly involved in, this was a liquefaction facility, so it's a natural gas to create LNG, liquefied natural gas. This was in the port community, and hearing you talk about the port in Savannah sounds like a very familiar story. I live in an EJ community in Providence that's along the Port of Providence. It's a bulk commodities terminal, so we don't have a lot of kind of prepared goods. It's it's oil and gas and chemicals, scrap metal, really hazardous materials, nasty, nasty stuff. And there is a natural gas pipeline that comes in there. So we also tried to insert ourselves. This was a federal permitting process that we got the health department. So I was part of the organizing on the outside in my community, got myself in trouble. There was the state part of the permitting process. The environmental agency had one piece of that. So outside of my work time, I showed up to testify along with other community members at this permitting hearing. And I heard about it the next day at work. What were you doing there? Those are your colleagues. You can't be talking to them like that, that kind of stuff. So one of the things I learned about inside-outside strategy is when you're on the inside, you have to let go of some of your outside organizing roles. You can't play that same role if you want to be effective on the inside. And so I played a lot of kind of behind-the-scenes roles, would still be part of the movements, would still be meeting with people, but it's kind of more of like sharing information. Here's something you need to know about. Here's what's coming up. Or getting direction from people, what do you need me to do? And you need to have those kind of trusting relationships. It was because I was part of those movements, I was part of the organizing groups. Institutional trust is built out of interpersonal trust, and that's where you have to start. So we ended up losing that battle. The liquefaction facility is currently being built. It's almost in operation. But because of all the organizing around that and looking at the Port of Providence and all of the issues with it, there has been a lot of other things that have been successful. We have since then been able to stop liquefied propane gas and LPG terminal from expanding. So that got canceled. They wanted to connect to rail and expand their facility. That got blocked. There was a construction and demolition debris waste transfer station that was proposed being built. I was able to represent the health department at those community meetings, sharing asthma data, which at that point was still my job in asthma. And that facility also was canceled. So, it's part of a long, we lost the battle, but we're kind of making progress in the longer term war. And then also working with the city of Providence, which doesn't have a health department, but the EJ organizing groups worked really closely. It was the Racial and Environmental Justice Committee working with the city of Providence, taking data we had at the health department around asthma in particular, and building that into the city's climate justice plan, which is supporting kind of long-term climate justice work at the city level in Providence, which has been a really important long-term process. There's a lot to say about the COVID response time. I think I'm going to skip over that in the interest of time. There was stuff around testing and access to data and hiring, who are the contact tracers and the case investigation and all of that. Providing quarantine and isolation supports for people who are in quarantine, resourcing community organizations with the millions of dollars of federal funding we were get to put that towards community groups that were doing that work directly. So I'm not going to go into details and vaccination equity, kind of who's first in line for vaccine access, which connected to some of the EJ organizing work, but is a little bit of a tangent. So I'll skip over that. I think what I wanted to just close with, in relating back to my work now at HIP around doing this national work with community power building organizations, both environmental justice and groups working on housing justice, groups working on police and prison abolition, a range of different topics, immigrant rights. A lot of common patterns. We see a lot of, institutions are, so many of our institutions are so fundamentally flawed, and so deeply problematic, and so are willing and active participants in systems of white supremacy in so many ways, that building these kinds of partnerships based on trust with community power building organizers is really challenging for many, many reasons that so many of my fellow panelists here just mentioned. So I think where I'm at right now in terms of where to put energy towards is on that kind of inside-outside strategy. The institutions, it's finding those people on the inside, or if you're on the inside, being that person on the inside who can, be willing to take risks, to organize your peers, to find access to, you're going to have access to levers of power in different ways. And at the end of the day, it's really about who are you accountable to, because as public servants, you should be accountable to the people. Most of the time, you're accountable to your boss and your boss's boss and your boss's boss, and it goes all the way up that chain of command to an elected official that is, government. I went into working at the health department thinking of government as the enemy, and I think there are many fundamental problems, but I've come to see government more as a terrain of struggle. And so when you're on the inside of that, finding your role, what do you have access to, and what battles do you want to pick? Because you can't fight all of them and be effective at any of them. So you have to be strategic around which battles to pick, how to do that, and having guidance on how to do that is based on your kind of relationships with people who are organizers and how you share information confidentially. Sometimes things have to be off the record. Sometimes you might strategically say, hey, this meeting happened. I saw this email come through. You should put in a public records request. Make sure to include these people on it. Make sure to timestamp it in this specific way. And then you'll get access to the information that I can't give you directly. But if you request it through this channel, then you can get it and you can make a media story about it. And then it can blow up and be the kind of thing that can shift the campaign. So there's going to be all kinds of tactics and strategies within that. But the fundamental piece is about your trust and your relationships and your accountability to the communities that are most impacted by these systems, because we all have a role to play in these struggles for a just and a livable future. And there are so many of these battles everywhere, no matter where you are, and we need to be fighting them with wherever we are, with whatever resources we have access to, with whatever positions of power we might be able to shift and move in whatever way we can. So thank you all for being in that struggle with us, and we're here with you, and thank you all for your time and attention.
Okay, we have some time for Q&A, but shameless plug. This panel was helped put together by Science Community Action Network. SciCan advances environmental justice advocacy by connecting grassroots leaders and issue area experts in environmental and public health science and policy to collaborate respectfully and intentionally share ideas and resources, and disrupt traditional academic approaches by placing community-lived expertise at the forefront of research and policy. We are going to have our next panelist session in this room tomorrow at 4:30, where we will have some really phenomenal speakers. We heard them earlier this week at Spelman, speaking about false solutions to climate change and mitigation. Really, really impressive speakers. So I hope you'll be able to join us there, and then at our reception afterwards. There's our QR code. Back to questions. Yes, sir.
I got my shameless plug. Can I do that now?
Yes.
Shameless plug. I'm like, oh, thanks.
Shameless plug from Julian.
Other shameless plug. The HIP and the Spirit of 1848 are hosting a social hour tonight on resistance and connection. So other activist-oriented social justice people in public health. It's 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. at the Hudson Grill downtown. It's free and open to community members. It's not in the conference space, so it's open to anybody who wants to come. And you all probably got the email from APHA telling you not to go to the protest tomorrow morning, so you all should go to that protest tomorrow morning in front of the main gate.
There you go. And now, questions and answers. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, there's that event you just mentioned, the No Fall Solution, the climate, from combating climate denials into fighting fall solutions, is at 4:30 to 6. There is a reception following that event, but we would love for you all to join that event because we have phenomenal speakers. And if you show up, then you'll be invited to the reception because we don't want it just to be like, oh, just go to the reception without engaging in that topic, because the public health implications for the fossil fuel industry and the militarization that's going on right now in our communities and here in Atlanta around Cop City, this is why we're doing this event. It's not connected to APHA at all. It's our community-led event, but I want to make sure that you all can join us, and then we'll give you the invite to that event.
All right. Please, questions for our phenomenal speakers today. If you're able to come up, please come up to the mic. If you're not able, just wave your hand and we'll see you.
I guess this is mostly for Julian. I think health departments need people like you, but are also probably irritated a little bit by people like you intentionally. I'm sure. Yeah, you talking about like, here's a meeting, do a FOIL request, like that terrifies me a little bit, but I think it's also really necessary. So I guess my question is, how did your supervisor or supervisors in the health department best support you in those community relationships that you already had and best allow you to bring that back to the work that you were currently doing?
Can I answer from here, or do I have to come up to there?
Whatever floats your boat.
Yeah, that is I think that's the hardest part about being it, and it is not an easy role being on the inside, and I think there is a lot of fear and the kind of like the risk of people's jobs being on the line, and so I think just as there needs to be accountability in relationships with your kind of people externally, that has to be kind of an accountable relationship with people internally, and it's a constant fine line to be navigating. I think a lot of the internal work that we were building was trying to get other people on the same page of here's the things we're all, if we're saying that we're for health equity, if we're saying we're for these outcomes, this is what it means to be doing that together. And sometimes it wasn't, I wasn't always telling my supervisor that, I was in communication with groups in the same way. I think I was lucky to have leadership in the health department who were women of color in these leadership roles who were really kind of long-term pushing an equity agenda, and so I think they were really supportive in those ways. And I think then there was an added layer for myself as a union member who had certain protections in my job, and as a cis white guy who had, it's like there's the intersection of your positional power and your identities and kind of what kinds of risks you're willing and able to take, and then the impact of your decisions on other people and their ability to take risks in different ways. And so I did have to be really strategic at certain times around maybe not pushing as hard as I would want to be pushing, because I didn't want to risk my my director and deputy directors, their relationship with their higher ups, and what the impacts of things could be on them. And so I think that's part of the, I think a lot of times it wasn't about like target the health department. It was around here's information and data that is health data, and kind of playing that like we have an objective role to play and being able to stay in that like lane of like we're just sharing information. We're just responding to community requests, and then the communities can use that information to target the elected officials. But sometimes that does come back to the health department, and when you're successful in that, the governor got pissed off, and my director had to get called into the principal's office a couple of times. And so we had those kind of tough conversations of how far can you push, but it's because we had these accountable relationships with each other around we're pushing for the same thing. Sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes you have your colleagues who are not on that same page and are not willing to do that. And then that's going to be a source of conflict and tension internally. And so kind of how we navigate conflict is an important part of our roles. So, I don't know if that answers your question, but it's hard.
Katarina, I have a more of like a methods question for you. I noticed in your presentation that when you were pulling the data, highlighting the health disparities between the Northwest, right, Northeast? Northwest, and Pasadena. When you're comparing those two, and you're comparing like the whole of Pasadena, do you include the Northwest in that like final number? I work in a local health department. We're facing something similar.
Yeah.
We haven't drawn a consensus on whether to include or not include.
Yeah, I include, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do we have any other questions? I have a question. I didn't want to usurp this opportunity. Okay. Jillian? So, oh, I wrote it down over there. So, you provided lessons learned that the state, thank you, that the state health department, came together. They said here are maybe some areas where we could have done better, engaging earlier on, providing payment for people's time. When they had those conversations, and you were still in training, is that right? Or was that, you had just finished training?
Yeah, so disclaimer, I was a former employee for the Michigan Climate Health Adaptation Program. That particular pilot project that I presented on occurred before I joined the team.
Okay, okay.
But yeah.
So my question was, did they also then talk about how they were going to implement those changes and lessons learned? My institution really struggles with figuring out how to, when we say we want to pay people for their time, that's really hard for them to process and wrap their heads around. And so I'm wondering, they came up with a great list of, okay, here's how we can do better. But then did they also say, okay, here's how we're going to do better? And if so, how, please?
Yeah, definitely. I don't know if I can answer that fully, not knowing exactly what they would say. I would say the people on that team are definitely, they're great people who are continually taking trainings on equity and justice. And so I think outside of just kind of them recognizing that this was an area that if they had worked with a different community with, reduced capacity, they might have not gotten the community partnerships and engagement. And they recognize that with this particular pilot project, they, for a lack of better words, I guess, didn't have to necessarily include it in the budget. I would say, talking with the project team there, going forward, they realized if they were to work with another community, that would not fly, basically, and really recognize, and like, I know it's not like a new protocol that maybe is written like in a document, but from talking to the project team and having like a former relationship, I guess just from personal relationship with them, know that is something that would be definitely a part and included into any kind of further like engagement of a new community that they didn't have existing relationships with.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to our fantastic panelists.